Thank you for reading Chapter 1. I wrote this over a year ago and forgot about it. I do hope you like it. Please review. And thank you for your messages. Smile. Chapter 2. He's a quiet boy. Jack strode over to Gwen's fireplace, picking up a photograph of the dark-haired girl, who had just raced down the stairs. He's very observant. Gwen stood by the living room door, her arm outstretched, leaning against it. Both boys were staring back at her, both grasping Jack's trouser legs. I need to talk to you about him. His face was still, sober. No, said Gwen. You've asked me to take him, Jack. He's parentless, lost, alone. Gwen looked at the pale face of Rodfy, who stared back at through dark brown hair with chestnut eyes. Don't tell me. Because then I'll know. Gwen stepped towards Roddy, holding out a hand. The boy did not move. And I'll be back in it all over again. She looked up to Jack. I own an estate agent now. She withdrew her unfilled hand and reached into her jeans pocket, passing Jack a card. It read, Williams Properties. Reese does them up, we sell them on. Neat bit of profit, Jack commented. It's all right. She looked down to Roddy again. All I need to know is how old he is. If he has any medical conditions. He's 11, Jack said, as the boy clung to him. Like Anwin. No medical conditions that I know of. His name is Roderick. Roderick. Gwen repeated. Just at that moment, a figure dashed from Jack's leg, under his coat and around to Roderick, clinging to his hand. He looked almost the same as Roddy, but his eyes were the palest of blue. David, didn't I ask you to wait next to me? Yes, Dad. The boy went still, falling to Jack's side. He's your son? Gwen looked at him, carefully. He's my responsibility, so is Roddy. A spark of something clicked in Gwen's mind. You're leaving Roddy here, Dad. It wasn't a question. And the look of accusation, of anger in David's face took Gwen by surprise. Jack dropped to the boy's level. It's just like we talked about, it's just for a little while. Jack turned to Roderick. He held out a hand. The older boy ran to him. They are twins. But there are reasons they must not be together, just now. But, if you can't, Jack looked between the boys, his jaw firm, his eyes fixed, I can probably. No. Don't, Gwen reiterated. I'll look after him, Roddy can have the room opposite us. Reese will like having a boy up and he can go to school with Anwin. No. Jack shot back, and Gwen thought she saw the boy shudder. He is bright, really clever, Jack conceded. He'll learn anything you give him. But he mustn't leave the house. Jack inhaled suddenly. Their mother died giving birth to them. At this, there was a long pause. There was more he wanted to say, Gwen knew. But instead, Jack concluded, he must be kept safe. Once it is over, then, maybe, school. Gwen did not ask what it was. Instead, she bent her knees to the boy's level. Roderick, do you like sausage and mash? He nodded. Gwen stood up and looked past them, to the kitchen. Anwin, sweetheart, can you lay the table? Take Rodfy with you, it can be his job. The dark-haired girl looked around the kitchen door. Roddy? She asked, looking Roderick up and down, doubtfully. Roderick, nodded her mother, not half so confident as she looked. Because she suspected, with his dark brown hair and chocolate brown eyes. Oh, she suspected. He's going to be staying with us for the foreseeable future. 88,888,888. It's done. Tosh handed the imprisonment tube to Ianto, clicking the cartridge out of the pen to be put into cryo storage. They won't bother us again, said Jack, folding his arms. Nice work, Torchwood 4. Gwen handed the translation cartridge to Tosh. I know, right? Tosh looked at the small piece of tech that was able to not only to communicate with the invading species, and also could empathize with them, convincing them to get to the right quadrant in the universe against their own better judgment. Then zap. Tosh held up the upgraded 4D transducer. all displaced into this tiny prison, Ianto intoned, looking at the silvery metal tube, no bigger than a ball pen insert. And she thought of all that herself? Asked Gwen, doubtfully. Why not? Ianto asked. He walked over to the cryo chamber, looking at the thin metal tube again, as if thinking about something long ago, or very important. Good old T4, Tosh said, approvingly. Mallory, you are something else, Jack replied, raising his coffee cup. You don't say, Owen, dully. All four of Torchwood 3 looked down to the operating theater. Owen looked away. So, you think you can integrate the language module into organic computer? Jack asked. If you want me to. It may be an irreversible process, said Tosh, looking at the cuboid, black, like a computer module add-on. The neural pathways in the computer may integrate it permanently and there would be no way of knowing which cells were the computer and which were the module. Tosh swiveled her chair round to Owen, who was analyzing fragments collected from the scene of a death thought to be a weevil. Does that make sense, Owen? Tosh asked. The way neural pathways form? Reluctantly, Owen looked up. Yeah? Is it your hand? Gwen asked. Owen, about to lower his head to the microscope again, instead took a step back and folded his arms. No. It's fine. He held up his left hand. Fine. They all four stared at Owen's hand. The wound had healed, more or less. Susie spent years looking for Torchwood 4, Tosh said, and all the time Jack, you knew where it was. Well, you're going up there in 2 days' time. You can find out if she knew Susie. Gwen goaded, suspecting her fauna lover felt about Mallory Collier as she did and, too, knowing that Owen would not want to think about returning to a crazy woman. What happened, anyway, Owen? Asked Gwen. Why did she bite you? Jack took a few steps forward, leaning, languidly, on the railings above the operating pit. Do you want Yo to tell her, or shall I? The captain asked. OM rubbed his hand. It still hurt. Then he narrowed his eyes to Jack. No. Doctor-patient confidentiality, said Owen, trying to block out the image from his mind. Damn straight, Jack replied, leaning back, and joining a swift nod of agreement to their doctor. But you knew about Torchwood 4? Gwen pushed. It was the original, it was Torchwood 1. Then Torchwood 1 was established in London and it became a mobile unit, set up with Archie McLeish. He runs Torchwood 2 now. I've met him, Ianto said, softly. In London, I was sent to Torchwood 2 for Rift activity data. He wanted to show me his magazine collection, but the pages were stuck together, said Ianto, pulling a face. Though he claimed it was McCowan's toffee. Ianto folded his arms. I've never seen white toffee. There was brief laughter at this. Tartan Archie? Owen asked of Jack, beginning to pack away the microscope. But he set this up in 1879. How is he still alive? Rift activity, Jack replied, pacing across to Tosh, who was analyzing the encryption on the language module. We may have the rift in Cardiff Bay, but it runs across the length and breadth of this country, where the Romans put roads, in fact. He bent down until his mouth was ear-height to Tosh. She nodded after about a minute, and began to unwire some cabling under her desk. It was the first unit, the original, mobile, reporting from different locations along the rift. Jack walked up the metal stairs to the floor above and poured into his cup coffee from the coffee pot. He leaned over the banister and took a sip. That was Roderick's job. He was much younger then, fresh put of Cambridge. Younger than Archie. Roderick Collier. Another sip. Born 10th of June 1921. Served in the war. Met his wife, married, had a daughter. Simple. From the cryo units, Ianto was staring at Jack. But then he died, Jack continued. Cancer, Gwen said. You said cancer, when we traveled home. Cancer. Jack nodded, solemnly. And whatever falling out Mallory had with her dad, his diagnosis brought them back together. She nursed him and co-ran Torchwood 4. Now, she manages it her own. Only, Keeps getting headaches, agonizing, debilitating headaches. Jack looked pointedly to Owen, who shrugged, defensively. So, how was it that she came to be screaming at you naked with a letter opener in her hand? There was an intake of breath from the others, and exclamations on the theme of, what? She wasn't naked. Owen looked back at the autopsy table. He would rather have his hands up to his wrist buried in that corpse's intestines than talk to Jack right now. Having her grandfather's army boots on is a technicality. Just to be clear. Naked. Ianto looked between Jack and Owen. Owen folded his arms. I told her to get comfortable, and when I turned round the weirdo had taken all her clothes off. Oh. Wow. And she screamed? Asked Tosh. Owen narrowed his eyes, really not wanting to have this conversation. Not immediately, no. I touched her head. Her head? Asked Gwen, smirking. Owen gave her an I'm not impressed look. He looked at their boss for support. Jack said she'd been getting excruciating headaches and asked me to take a look. When I touched her head to examine it, that's when she screamed. Poor woman, said Ianto, sympathetically. She keeps forgetting she shouldn't take her clothes off. Gets too hot, Jack explained. Gwen and Owen exchanged looks. Works like that, a lot of the time. She works. Naked. Why not? Jack asked. There's no one around, the perception filter is on, she gets hot sometimes. But I've told her to put at least something on. Routine. She needs routine. He swigged his coffee. It must be hard being alone, being just one person in her own Torchwood, said Tosh, generously. Ianto nodded, vaguely. She's weird, scorned Owen, though looking anywhere but at Jack. She is vital. We stopped an alien species before it invaded Earth, before it left its own part of the galaxy. We have tech we can only dream of. She's too young to die. Then you burst in, Owen concluded, of his sorry tale. And she attacked me with a letter opener. Owen walked across to the steps of the operating theater, removing some instruments from the gamma radiation sterilizing unit with one gloved hand. She looked good in your coat, Jack. Once you'd come to rescue her from my evil clutches, he continued, scornfully. How else was I supposed to work out what the matter was with her head without touching it? She thought you were going to hurt her. You could have at least explained. It was all going so well, Owen added, even as I was having to ignore, well. The sight of her naked body inches from you? Gwen scorned. Owen glowered at her. Javk talked her out of using what turned out to be a laser scalpel on me. I took it away from her. It was then she bit me. For the third time that afternoon, "Theet" was a collective exclamation from Ianto, Tosh, and Gwen. Jack, who is this woman? Gwen asked. I told you, parents Roderick Collier and Ren Smith. Born into the family business, so to speak. And, Torchwood 4. Her police inquiry skills had not evaded her, and Gwen suspected instinctively that Jack was not telling them the entire truth. Look, I've told you too much. Jack turned and looked pointedly at Ianto. Torchwood 1, London, chose to try to destroy her rather than help her. I'm not gonna stand by and watch her be disturbed. Jack threw up his arms as his voice increased in volume and began to pace around. This was a mistake, taking you all. Sure, we needed the tech, and fast. She doesn't do people. We won't be returning. What a relief. Now I can get back to dissecting this Sontaran? Asked Owen, scornfully. No. You're going back, Jack replied, jabbing a finger at Owen. Give her something for these headaches, make her well. They're making her vulnerable. Weak. She needs to be strong for her work. No way, Jack. Owen's mouth said, as a thought crossed his mind like a cloud over the sun. Then I will, and you will show me how to treat her, show me the dose, and how often, injection, medication. No. Owen shouted back. But his face was betraying the truth. Mallory Collier was his patient now and, as his patient, he was resigned to treating her for her condition. Avoiding Jack's look of triumph on seeing Owen's face, he stalked back off to his Sontaran autopsy.